You are a very good crowd. That worked better than it ever has before. So thank you very much for coming in this afternoon. And good afternoon and welcome to the Kentucky Chamber's 10th Annual Business Summit presented by Bingham, Greenbaum, Dahl. I'm Bill Goodman, host of Kentucky Tonight on KET, and I'll be serving as your official announcer for the next couple of days. We have a lot of ground to cover. So let me just mention a couple of housekeeping rules that you need to know about, some room assignments and that sort of thing. All the sessions that you will attend during the summit will be held in this room, except for tomorrow's keynote luncheon. It will be upstairs in Salon 5. This evening, the annual dinner, also sponsored by Bingham, Greenbaum, Dahl, begins with a reception at 5 p.m. upstairs outside the Marriott Ballroom near the registration desk where you came in and picked up your papers. Tomorrow we start with a continental breakfast sponsored by Kentucky Power, and that's located right outside these doors beginning at 8 a.m. And tomorrow's sessions will begin in this room. Will start promptly at 8:30. And finally, and I know you're in the room, if you're a Twitter user, please join in the conversation and tweet out the Business Summit and the activities that are going on as much as you possibly can. The Kentucky Chamber uses their account, that's KY/KY Chamber, that's twitter.com/KY Chamber. And if you mention the summit, and I'm sure you will, be sure that you use hashtag KYBiz, B-I-Z. Now to officially open the 10th Annual Business Summit today is the 2015 Kentucky Chamber Chair, Will James Jr. Will is also president of Toyota Motor Manufacturing Company in Georgetown. Will, as many of you know, has led Toyota's largest automotive manufacturing operation in North America. Since 2010, his career with Toyota began in 1987, supervising a team of about 20 people at the Georgetown plant. He's now in his 28th year with Toyota. Will leads one of Kentucky's largest businesses, representing a $6 billion investment, which today directly employs more than 7,500 Kentuckians. Please join me in welcoming Kentucky Chamber Chair Will James.
Okay, thank you, Bill. I'm truly excited to be here with you all today. This is truly a top-notch chamber event packed with topics that are crucial to making progress in our Commonwealth. I'm especially proud to be a part of the 10th Anniversary Business Summit. Over the past 10 years, this event has become the most prominent issues forum in the Commonwealth. And these conversations will help to shape the course of our state. The staff of the Kentucky Chamber has worked hard to create an impressive lineup of regional and national speakers for this event, not just for this year, but also for the previous 9 business summits as well. It's very exciting as a member of Kentucky's business community to see firsthand the progress that's been made over the past few years, thanks to the influence of the Kentucky Chamber and its membership, many of you who are here in the room today. However, there's still a lot of work to be done to advance Kentucky, and I can't wait to hear the discussions about how we can move forward together. Thank you all for joining us this year, and thank you to our presenting sponsor, Bingham, Greenbaum, and Dahl, and our platinum sponsor, Norton Healthcare, as well as many of our other sponsors for making this event possible. Now, at this time, I would like to welcome the Leadership Kentucky class of 2015. I'm so thrilled to see so many business leaders in this group. Would you all stand, please? Beautiful group there, and that's our future, folks. Finally, I'm pleased to call Bill Goodman back up to the stage so we can get this conversation started. Bill, it's all yours.
Thanks very much, Will. We'll start off with an issue that all of you have a great deal of interest in. All Kentuckians should, and we will gain some insight this afternoon from the remarks that you will hear. Our opening keynote presentation will provide those insights, and we're going to introduce our moderator and the person who will be doing the introductions, and that's Janet Jacobowitz. She is chair of Bingham Greenbaum Dahl's Partnership Board and a member of the firm's litigation practice group. Her practice focuses on business and commercial litigation. It's also take note of the fact that Janet will be joining the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce's Board of Directors in October. So please welcome Janet Jacobowitz.
Good afternoon. On behalf of Bingham Greenbaum Dahl, we are honored to once again to be presenting presenting sponsor of this remarkable business summit and the annual meeting. As one of the region's full-service corporate firms, we appreciate and we understand the difficulties and the challenges that our clients face every day. And we also understand the importance of staying informed on the issues that are likely to impact this Commonwealth. And I hope that all of you will take advantage of the wonderful sessions and events that will take place over the next couple of days. And it is now my pleasure to introduce the opening keynote of the summit. The Kentucky Public Pension is considered by some to be the most significant fiscal threat to this Commonwealth. And today you will have the opportunity to hear from the state's top public officials who are charged with managing these systems from the public retiree perspective and their strategies for returning these systems to solvency. Now I'm pleased now to welcome the three speakers and the moderator for this session. Jim Carroll served from 1978 through 2009 as a public information officer and communication director for Kentucky state government. He was a founder of the Kentucky Association of Government Communicators. And as you may know, there are also two major retirement systems for public employees in Kentucky. We have the KTRS, the Teachers Retirement System, and the KRS for most state and local employees. And we have the leaders for both of those systems here with us today as well. Gary Harbin is the Executive Secretary of the Kentucky Teachers Retirement System. Mr. Harbin has been recognized for implementing significant advancements in the governance and operations of the retirement system. We also have Mr. Bill Thielen. He is the Executive Director of the Kentucky Retirement Systems, which manages the daily administration of the pension and insurance plans. And this session will be moderated by Bill Lear. He is the Managing Director of Stoll Keenan, Ogden, and the Kentucky Chamber Board Chair-elect in 2016. Bill is a former legislator and a former chairman of Commerce Lexington. So please help me in welcoming our speakers and moderators for today's session.
Y'all go ahead, I'm gonna stop by. Let's see. Janet, thanks very much for those great introductions. One of the reasons I agree to do this sort of thing is every once in a while it's nice to hear a partner from another law firm say nice things about me. I'll be glad to return the favor. I want to lay the foundation for this by going into just a little bit more detail than Bill and Janet did about what I would call the problem that we're here to discuss, the Kentucky Chamber's attention to this problem over a period of time, and why it's important, as if that weren't obvious to everybody that's in this room already. I would echo what Janet said just a few minutes ago. Many believe that the unfunded liability of Kentucky's major public employee pension systems is the darkest cloud on the economic horizon of our state. You would find some others who might put the expansion of Medicaid in that policy for those matters that are within the control of state government. If you go outside, you might have a candidate in the downturn of the coal industry, but whether you think this is number one, number two, or number three, you would have to acknowledge that it's a problem. Unfunded liability for pension systems is not a terribly difficult, it's a fairly simple concept, but it's got a lot of moving parts. Essentially, there are contributions made to purchase assets. The assets produce returns, and the returns are used to pay benefits. If the actuarially determined liability, the amount of the benefits paid, exceeds the potential the projected returns on the investments, there's unfunded liability. In Kentucky today, KTRS, the Teachers Retirement System, is adjudged by those who are experts in the field to have an unfunded liability of $14 billion. KERS, in the various systems that it controls, has an unfunded liability of $17.1 billion. Now, the Chamber is not a Johnny-come-lately to this issue. Even before the recession back in 2007, when things appeared to be turning in the negative direction and turning in that direction from where things were at the end of the last century, which is in pretty good shape, it partnered with the Pritchard Committee and the Kentucky League of Cities to begin bringing attention to this issue. It turned up the volume in its leaky bucket campaign. It has supported legislative changes that have, in fact, made some improvements in 2008, 2010, and 2013, which have perhaps slowed the bleeding some, but obviously have not cured the patient. Late last year, the Chamber called upon Adam Edlin, the state auditor, asking him to conduct a performance audit, which is different, as I'm sure you know, from a financial audit of the Kentucky retirement system. He was not able to secure the $250,000 yet that he needs to hire outside consultants to that, but that still is very much an issue for the Chamber and is on the state auditor's plate. In 2015, the Chamber pushed legislation calling for an independent review of KTRS, and recently Governor Beshear has appointed a 23-person work group that Dave Atkinson, our president, is a member of, to try to come up with with recommendations to deal with the situation of insolvency in KTRS. Just a small personal point here. I turned 65 on June 26th. As a former legislator, I'm not in the legislative retirement plan. I may, as an act of either lunacy or conscience, when I joined the legislature, I joined KERS. You got to join one of them. So I joined KERS, and I've received my first whopping retirement check just the other day. Bill and Jim, I'm one of your folks, and I guess I will be for some period of time. Well, why is this important? Again, I think it's self-evident. Number one, these unfunded liabilities threaten the financial security of important present and former employees of our state. Secondly, they impair the state's credit rating. We've already seen bond ratings lowered. That means that every bonded project costs more, and that's going to continue to be the case going down the road in the future. And third, and this is a direct quote from one of the Chamber publications, it represents the single most significant threat to Kentucky's ability to ensure adequate funding for education and other important public services both now and in the future. Well, we've assembled a great group of panelists. Each of them will talk about one of the two major systems. I believe the order in which they're going to go is Gary first, then Bill, and then Jim. We'll hear from them, and then I've got some questions that I'm going to pose to them to try to illuminate things further. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you all. I'm looking for my clicker here. On behalf of the 140,000 teachers in our system, I'm proud to be here today before you. And thank you, David. I'm proud to be here before you, and this system has been around since 1940, and it's an important part of teacher compensation in Kentucky. In Kentucky, we're one of the few states in the nation where teachers don't have and aren't subject to Social Security. This is the only benefit they have in retirement. And because of federal laws, they won't be able to draw their spouse's Social Security benefit either, for the most part. So this is an extremely important part of a teacher's compensation in Kentucky. It's a great benefit for them to be able, for school districts to be able to retain them in the classrooms. And I can tell you that it's a very important topic to those 140,000 people, both active and retired. And I got some brief facts here about the pension plan that we'll run through. And the first fact that we'll run through is how much does the pension cost? This is called the normal cost of a benefit. The normal cost of this benefit is 16.75% of pay. You can see that if they were subject to Social Security, there'd be 12.4% of pay that would go out the door just for Social Security. In Kentucky, the average Social Security benefit is about $1,100. Our average benefit is around $3,000 a month, $36,000. Just to throw out a few other facts, our average teacher teaches to age 58 and has 30 years of service at that time, our average full-time teachers. So, and they're drawing a benefit that averages on average $3,000 a month. You can see the net cost of the teacher's portion of the benefit there. They pay most of the cost of that 16.75%. They pay 9.11% of that. And in addition to that 9.11% that they pay toward their retirement, they're also paying 3 3/4% toward their retiree medical benefit. Compare that to the 1.45% that most employees pay. Teachers also pay that 1.45% in to Medicare. So over and above Medicare, they're paying 3.75% of their pay into our plan in order to fund their retiree medical benefit. The state's cost, the net cost after the teacher's cost, is 7.64%. You compare that to Social Security of 6.2%. The state's net cost over and above Social Security is 1.44% of 1.44% of pay. So that gives you an idea of the net cost for this benefit. That's assuming the plan was 100% funded and we never had any unfunded liabilities. Unfunded liabilities have been with the plan since it first started. There's been underfunding all the way back to 1940. Administrative expenses, we have a low-cost operation. Both us and KRS have low cost of investments. You can see a chart that was prepared here by the Programs Review and Investigation Committee back in 2012, comparing us to other states. And we have, at KTRS, we have very low administrative costs too. Our investment expenses today are about 21 basis points, and our administrative expenses are 4 basis points. All-in cost of administering both the pension and the medical benefit for our teachers, the 140,000 teachers, is about 25 basis points. The reason that we're here today is primarily on this chart. And you can see the S&P 500 over the 13-year period from 2000 to 2013 was flat. So all those monies that we received over that period of time and were invested earned very little. And we're in the same boat as other public pension plans around the nation and 401k plans, participants in 401k plans. I have 30 years in the private sector. My 401k plan, I had to put more money in it during this period of time because it didn't grow over this period of time. I had to add additional contributions to that. You can see only recently that that's ticked up. This is an important study that's been done, and there's some information on this slide, and I'm sure it'll be made available to you later. But it was done by Boston College and their Center for Retirement Research. They've got a great paper on pension plans that they just put out in June of this year. And there's another great paper they have on Social Security out there too, and the insolvency of Social Security. Social Security is going to cost us all about 4% of pay to fix it. So that's coming down the road, and the quicker we fix that, the lower that percentage will be. Right now, it's just standing at about 4% of pay additional. These are the averages that we took from that report of about 150 pension plans in the appendix of that report. These are the averages. You can see in 2001 there on the left, the average funded ratio was 100% in 2000. That's right before the tech bubble burst. Then when the tech bubble burst and the housing bubble burst, those two things have impacted all pension plans. Funded status dropped from 100% to around 70%. But look what the other states have done. They've raised contribution rates. Contribution rates have gone from 6% to 18% over that period of time that other states have paid into their pension plans. This is our pension plan compared to that, KTRS. We were 90% funded at the same time, 2001. Today we're 53% funded. But you can see our contribution rate has stayed flat. We have the same contribution rate today that we had in 2000 in this pension plan. There has been no additional contributions put in along the way. And this is all of the pension plans that our employees deal with. In the school districts, the CERS plan takes care of classified workers. So we have certified workers that are in our plan, classified workers that are in CERS. The CERS contribution rates have gone up. And in Kentucky today, we're putting more money into the retirement accounts on a percentage basis for bus drivers and cafeteria workers than we do for teachers. We're putting 19% aside for bus drivers and cafeteria workers. We're putting 13% aside for teachers. Cash flow has been negative in our plan since 2008 when we first started asking for contribution increases. Since 2008, we've had to sell $2 billion in assets in order to meet payroll. Today, our retiree benefits, 1/4 of our retiree benefits are paid by selling assets of the system. We had to sell $600 million in assets this year to meet retiree payroll, and we're looking to have to sell $3.5 billion over the next 4 years to meet retiree benefits. Investment performance. We've had a great investment team at the office working for our teachers. Over the past year, we earned 8.6% through March 31st. That put us in the top 10% in the nation of pension plans with $1 billion or more. Over the 3-year period, we're in the top 8%. Over the 5-year period, the top 13%. And over the 10-year period, we've been in the top 36%. So our investment performance has been there. We just haven't had the assets to invest. In 2010, there was a great piece of legislation that was passed. It was called shared responsibility. At that time, teachers in Kentucky were about to lose their retiree health care. Teachers stepped up and contributed 3% more of their pay, and school districts matched that. And retired teachers started paying the Medicare Part B equivalent premium if they were under age 65. And they saved the medical plan. The medical benefit, the unfunded liability of that dropped from $8.3 billion to $2.7 billion today as a result of them stepping up and pre-funding that benefit. So teachers have stepped up and helped taxpayers of Kentucky quite a bit here in coming up with these unfunded liabilities. This slide shows the payouts of the system over the last 15 years. Today we pay out $2.1 billion. Our monthly payroll is $144 million in retirement benefits and about another $30 million in medical benefits each month that go out the door. $2.1 billion that goes back. 92% of that stays in Kentucky. 92% of our retiree benefits. I told you a little earlier that our population is not subject to Social Security. I'll give you a little bit more demographics about our population. They're 70% women, and when they retire, 52% of those under age 80 are single when they retire. 85% of those age 80 and older are single. So you can see this is a very vulnerable population. This is the only benefit they have, so we have to work to get this thing funded. My last slide here shows the system for the last 25 years, since 1985. It's close to 30 years, excuse me. Beginning balance then was $1.8 billion. Teachers have contributed $6 billion over that period of time. The states put in $10.2 billion. We've earned $21.5 billion, and we've paid out $21.4 billion in benefits and expenses. And today our assets stand at $18.1 billion. So with that, I'll turn this over to Mr. Thielen and let him give you some rundown on KRS. Thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon. It's indeed a pleasure to be here. The time is short, as demonstrated by Gary's presentation, and this is a complex set of issues, so I'm going to dive right in. First, some basic facts. Kentucky Retirement Systems is not associated with and not a part of the Kentucky Teachers Retirement System or the legislative or judicial retirement systems that exist for our state legislators and judicial officers. Let me refer you very quickly to our website. You see the URL there. We have an enormous amount of information on Kentucky retirement systems on our website. So I encourage you, if you have an interest beyond today to find out about Kentucky retirement systems, please use our website and you'll find, I think, much more than you could ever tackle out there. Now, we administer 3 basic retirement systems. KERS, Kentucky Employees Retirement System for state employees, the County Employees Retirement System for city, county, local agency employees, and the State Police Retirement System for uniformed state police personnel. Now, both KERS and CERS have hazardous duty and non-hazardous plans. And all 3 of the systems have pension and insurance plans. So we actually administer 10 separate pension and insurance plans. Each pension plan has 3 different tiers of benefits that were created by the various reforms that have taken place over the last 12 years. And each of the insurance plans has 3 tiers of benefits. So we administer a very complex set of plans. And if they're not the most complex in the country, they're among the most complex in the country. Each of these plans is a separate legal trust. While we might invest monies from each of the plans in a single investment, we account for it separately in terms of the amount invested, the cost of investment, and the returns. We do not legally and cannot legally use the money of one plan to pay the benefits or costs of another plan. They stand independently, and we account for those independently. Now, we have we're administered by a 13-member board of trustees. That number was increased from 9 with the passage of Senate Bill 2 in 2013. 6 of the members are elected by the active, inactive, and retired members of the various systems. 6 members are appointed by the governor with certain qualifications, and 1 member is ex officio, the Secretary of Personnel of the state. So in essence, 7 members are appointed by the governor and 6 members are elected from the members of the plan. In fact, our Board of Trustee Chair, Tommy Elliott, who's with Old National Bank here in Louisville, is here with us somewhere today. I'm not sure where he's sitting. This is a snapshot of our membership. We have 348,000 plus members. They fall into active employees, inactives that have terminated but left their money in the system and one day will be due a benefit or a refund, and then retired members. There are 107,000 retired members and beneficiaries of the system. And you can see the large bar in the center of this chart is the CERS non-hazardous plan. It's with about 200,000 members, the largest. On the far left is the KERS non-hazardous plan, non-hazardous state employees. It's our second largest plan, and that plan has about 120,000 members. As of the end of the 2015 fiscal year, and this is on an unaudited basis, we had approximately $15.7 billion in the bank. But we pay out $2.2 billion a year in benefits, both pension and insurance. 96% of that amount or thereabouts is paid to residents in Kentucky. So we have a significant impact on Kentucky's economy, just like KTRS. In fact, it's about the equivalent of what the horse industry, the impact the horse industry has on the economy throughout the state. Now, we're funded by 3 sources: employee contributions, which are set by statute, and I'm not going to go into their amounts, but it's 5 or 6% for non-hazardous and 8 or 9% for the hazardous members. employer contributions, which are set by our Board of Trustees based on an annual actuarial evaluation of what's needed for the next year, and then return on investments. Now, this represents a benefit dollar paid out. And as I said, in pension benefits, we pay out about $1.8 billion a year. Of every benefit dollar we pay out, about 12 cents or 12% of that dollar is produced from employee contributions. About 20% comes from the employer contributions, and the remaining 68% on a historical basis comes from our investment return. So you can see how important having the money in the bank and investing it in a positive way, the importance of the impact of that. And that's consistent with the national scene. This is a pie chart which shows basically the equivalent proportions in terms of each benefit dollar paid out for about 80 public pension plans around the country. Employer contributions here are 26% compared to our historical 20%, but they're pretty much the equivalent. Now, the investment of our assets is handled by a investment committee that we're required to have by statute. It's currently made up of 5 members of our Board of Trustees with certain experience requirements. The investment committee has full power through the policies established by the board to make the investment decisions for the funds, and those are ratified by the Board of Trustees. Now, about 20% of our dollars are invested internally by a non-member, highly certified and experienced investment team that we have in-house. In fact, our Chief Investment Officer, somewhere over here with the Leadership Kentucky team, he's a part of that team this year, or that Leadership Kentucky group, and we look forward to the experiences he's going to have there. The other 80% of our funds are invested by external investment managers, and we have approximately 80 or 82 of those. They are hired by decisions of our investment committee and the board after a rigorous due diligence process that's assisted by 4 national investment advisors that we hire on an RFP or request for proposal process. Now, in terms of funded status, you heard Mr. Lear indicate that we have about $17 billion in unfunded liability. You read nationally and even in the regional media that KRS has the worst funded pension plan in the country. Well, the fact of the matter is that that's only rightfully stated for one of our 10 plans. The KERS non-hazardous plan, and I'll show you a chart here in a moment. Excuse me, let me back up for a moment. This chart just simply shows our investment return over the fiscal year and calendar year basis from 1990 through 2014. In 8 out of the 25 years represented, we have not met our assumed rate of investment return, which right now is 7.5%. In the remainder of the years, we've done very well. In fact, in 4 of the last 5 years, we've had significant double-digit returns. So our investment performance overall has been very good. This chart, the bottom portion of it, if you look at the far right, since we've been keeping these records for 31 years, our pension plan has averaged 9.41% investment return for a year. And the insurance plan's right at 7.5%, which is our assumed rate of return right now. Anyway, back to the funded status. You read about KRS having the worst funded pension plan in the country. That may well be true for the KERS non-hazardous plan. At the end of the fiscal year 2014, it had a funded status or a funding level of 21%. Now, ideally, you want your pension plan to be 100% funded. That means you have 100% of the assets in the bank to pay the liabilities for benefits that have already been earned. Well, none of our plans are 100% funded. At the beginning of the 2000 calendar year, they were. But since that time, in the last 15 years, the funded status has been eroded for a variety of reasons. And the KERS plan is the most significantly underfunded of the group. Now, it's not necessarily bad to be somewhat underfunded at any given period of time, because the payout of pension benefits occurs over a lengthy period, up to 40 years or so. So you have time to make up for something less than 100% funding. But when you get down to 25% funded level like KERS non-hazardous is, or 35% for our state police plan, then you've got significant issues. The CERS plans are over 60% funded, and the KERS hazardous plan is well over 60% funded. While it's less than ideal, there's no problem with those, and their funded status is increasing, and they're not in any jeopardy. So what's been done over the last few years to address this issue? Actually, quite a lot. Beginning in 2003, the Kentucky legislature passed a significant reform of the health insurance benefit. It was actually turned into essentially a defined contribution benefit now that's much less than it was prior to July 15, 2013. And I don't really have time to go into it, but it made a significant difference in terms of the ultimate cost of the health insurance benefit going forward. In 2008, House Bill 1 was passed by the General Assembly. One of the things they did was establish a schedule to increase funding over a 12 to 15-year period. The good news was they were increasing the funding. The bad news was they were still going to underfund the system for the next 12 to 15 years. But they also made some significant changes in terms of the retirement age that was required before you could retire with a full benefit. They changed some service purchase cost calculations, which made it 100% actuarially sound in terms of the cost of purchasing service. So some significant changes, including establishing a cost of living adjustment at 1.5% in 2008, when previously it had been up to 5%. So those changes were made in 2008, and then in 2013, Senate Bill 2 was passed, which established this third tier of pension benefits called a hybrid cash balance plan for all new employees that began participating January 1, 2014 and after. Senate Bill 2 also established the General Assembly's intent to pay 100% of the actuarially required contribution going forward, whereas for 15 out of the 22 years before that, they had paid far less than the actuarially required contribution. So the first year that they've done that was 2015, and they're paying that 100% of the ARC this year as well. So it is absolutely critical that that continues going forward. The effect of all these legislative changes really is to make the retirement system that exists now sustainable in the future. But it's going to take 12 to 15, 18 years to get there, until enough people come out of the first tier of benefits, which is much richer, and the new employees begin to fill out the second and third tier of benefits that have been created. In fact, if we did not have any unfunded liability, the percent of payroll that would be needed to pay all of the benefits in the KERS non-hazardous system would be 7% of payroll. But because of the unfunded liability of $17 billion, 11.5 billion of it in KERS non-hazardous, the current contribution rate is 38.77% of payroll. So 32% of it, or thereabouts, is there to pay for this unfunded actuarial liability. And that's the problem going forward. Changes have been made to make the system sustainable in the long run, but we have this unfunded liability for benefits already earned that either has to be paid or the promise to pay those benefits has to be broken. Those are really the only alternatives. We're going to have to find the money necessary to pay the benefits, or the promise is going to have to be broken, and retiree and active member benefits are going to have to be reduced going forward. The other problem that we really face is in the KERS non-hazardous plan, which I said is only 21% funded. We have experienced negative cash flow in that plan for a number of years. Our actuaries have looked at it, and if we make our assumptions, in other words, the most important one being earning our assumed rate of return on investments, if we do that and the legislature pays 100% of the actuarially required contribution, this plan won't run out of money. caveat to that is, if we experience a downturn like we did in 08, 09, where we lost in 09 17% of our assets, then that plan is going to be in significant jeopardy. And it become much more costly if it goes to zero and the legislature has to fund it on a pay-as-you-go basis. So any additional money over and above the actuarially required contribution over a period of time would be very beneficial to that plan. Let me, I didn't show you all of it. This chart actually shows the combined funded status of all of our, the basic plans. And you can see the top row, the KERS non-hazardous plan. On a combined basis, pension and insurance was 22% funded in, at the end of 2014 fiscal year versus 23.2% in the year before. So with that, I'm going to end this, turn it over to Mr. Carroll, who's going to talk about, I think, the funded status of these plans, and we'll welcome questions afterwards.
Thanks, Bill.
Good afternoon. I want to express my appreciation to the Chamber of Commerce for inviting me here today. This is a very real crisis and involves a lot of folks, and it's imperative that we have dialogue on this issue to come up with solutions to a serious problem, solutions that we can all live with, and that may be more than we can ask for, but we have to try. I also want to take this opportunity to thank Bill Thielen for his service as Executive Director of Kentucky Retirement Systems. He's going to be on the other side of things at the end of the year, being a retiree. And we wish him the best of luck in retirement, and look forward to the presentation of the KRS bulletproof vest when that happens, because he's had a tough road to hoe over the last several years, and I'm afraid I probably contributed a bit to that. By way of explanation, I'm co-founder of a Facebook community called Kentucky Government Retirees that my wife and I started back in 2011 as a reaction to the growing concern that we as stakeholders had in the status of KRS non-hazardous plan. All of the plans have an significant unfunded liability, but we have a crisis in KRS non-hazardous that can't be ignored. Last October, I appeared before the legislature's Public Pension Oversight Board to ask that board in its legislative recommendations to come up with some sort of funding solution for KRS non-hazardous during the 2015 legislative session. I pointed out that the assets of that fund were lost between 2008 and now, lost half its value from $5 billion to $2.5 billion. All defined benefit plans lost a lot of money during the crash in 08 and 09, and certainly that plan was no different than the others. It lost $700 million in 08 and $1.4 billion in 09, but the difference is that with the recovery, other plans are starting to get back to their funded status, but unfortunately, that's not the case with this plan. It continues to bleed assets every year, and for one simple reason, and that's employer underfunding. Starting back in the mid-90s and then consistently from the point of 2003 until 2014, a succession of governors and legislators decided not to put in the full actuarial required contribution to the plan. And the result of that has been that it's no different than having a mortgage. How many people here have had a 30-year house mortgage? Most of us. How many here have made partial payments for the first 12 years of that mortgage? Not very many of us. And so if we did begin to make the full payment after 14 years, do we think we've solved the problem? Well, of course not. You're still upside down. And this plan is upside down. It made 15.5% on its investments in fiscal year 14, and its assets went down by $183 million. I mean, this is topsy-turvy. It's like Alice through the looking glass. In 13, it made 11.1% on its investments and lost $212 million in assets for the simple reason that this underfunding created a situation where the investments simply can't keep up with the demand for the benefits. The Oversight Board did put a funding recommendation in place, but the legislature did not act. There really wasn't any serious discussion of addressing this issue in 2015. Unfortunately, the bad news gets even worse. Our assets continue to decline in that fund. I believe it was the first 3 quarters of the fiscal year we'd shown an asset loss of $205 million. I don't know where it ends up. And then unfortunately, our investments have failed to meet 7.5%. What more concerning than that is a study that was recently conducted for KRS by RVK, an asset liability study, and the purpose of this is to help guide the portfolio decisions for KRS. It showed that there is a 5 to 8% chance of total insolvency in this fund sometime in the next 20 years. That assumes the full employer contribution every year, and it assumes 7.5% return on investment, and we've already busted that. It shows there's a better than 50% chance that this fund will reach pay-as-you-go. By that I mean it will reach the point where they will have to be forced to get rid of all stocks and other long-term investments and become a completely liquid plan and move all that into cash equivalent in order to pay the benefits. The benefits of $900 million, if your assets get down to $1.3 billion, there's no sense in having long-term investments because you're having to turn around and they go out the door in benefit payments. Now, that is not a sustainable plan. That's a plan that no longer has the foundation of benefit payments, which is investment income. So what's the impact? Well, the impact on the employer part of this is the actuarially required contribution skyrockets because you have only employee and employer contributions now paying those benefits. What's the impact on rating agencies? Well, obviously, Standard & Poor's and Moody's and Fitch's will look at this and say, why haven't you fixed this problem? This is not a sustainable defined benefit plan, and you got to fix it. And we're going to downgrade your credit rating. Now, what's it mean for stakeholders? Well, with those $915 million circulate in our economy, but certainly I will advise our folks if we get down to $1.3 billion and we no longer have investment income, stop spending money, because this is the beginning of the end. Unless some miraculous cure comes through, we're going to have to put off discretionary spending. And in a place like, Franklin County, which has 6,000 retirees, what are the restaurants going to look like when people are squeezing down on their discretionary spending? Thinking about renovating the kitchen, well, you're going to put that off if you think that your benefits are threatened. So that's really the where we come from as stakeholders is deeply concerned that this whole thing goes bust, and that has an impact throughout the economy. Our concern is really that the next market correction could be fatal. Every defined benefit plan is predicated on being able to handle the ups and downs in the market. This one is uniquely vulnerable in the United States in the sense that its assets are so low, it may not be able to survive the next market correction. And who of us here believes that the market's going to go infinitely up for the next 20 years? So how do you fix the problem? Well, we've been through the benefit adjustments that Bill alluded to in 2003, 2008, and 2013. Cost of living adjustments are now dead. I don't expect to ever get one again in my lifetime, nor can you rationally expect to have a cost of living adjustment when the actual fate of your defined benefit plan is in jeopardy. So for the next session, as stakeholders, we're going to ask for ARC Plus, the required contribution from employers, plus an amount over and above that. We think that there's been some recent studies that show that $250 million over and above the ARC per year for the next 4 years could have a measurable impact on the funding ratio. Or if you did that for 8 years, it would even have a better impact, obviously. That's a tall order. The budget can't take that. We know that going into this. It's going to be hard enough to pay the required contribution because it's going to go up. So we're not tax policy experts. We think there needs to be some sort of dedicated revenue stream and a commitment in the next legislature to pay the ARC plus an amount above that. It's a matter of frustration for us that we can't really come to the table and make a recommendation, but it's not within our bailiwick to come up with that. We hope that there are legislators right now looking at this issue, realizing that waiting is not going to help. If you wait 2 more years at the next budget year, the options aren't going to get any better. They're not going to be any different. The budget's not going to get any better. Now, someday we may have tax reform, but can't do tax reform as long as there's an election, and there's always an election. Going to have to fix this, and we certainly as stakeholders will be happy to be at the table when someone is willing to take this issue on, and we're certainly hopeful that that will happen in the next biennium. Thanks again. I'll be happy to respond to any questions at the end of the session. Thanks.
Not back on. There we go, I'm back. Well, I'll come up here so you can see me. If you don't think this is a tough issue, when all of us up here started wrestling with it, we all were several inches taller and had full heads of hair. If you look at this group, you'll understand how it's ground us down. Jim mentioned something that was, I think, right on the top of my list. Assuming for the sake of this discussion that the way to address, the only way, and I'm not accepting that assumption, but assuming that the only way is to address it is with more money, how much more a year would it take to create the appropriate level of funding? And from your perspective, where's the money going to come from, assuming also that we've got higher education that wants more money, elementary and secondary that needs more money, the Medicaid situation, and all the other funding priorities that the state has. Please, all three of you, weigh in. Just tell us how much it's going to take and where it's going to come from.
From my perspective, I think the notion of an additional $250 million would maybe keep the wolf out of the door. I mean, it's not a huge amount of money. A bond issue is not a realistic option for KRS. You don't do a bond issue for a fund that's failing. I mean, that's the last thing you do. If you had $250 million more dollars, it raises the funding ratio by, what, 6 or 8 percentage points, something like that, some fair amount. And where the money come from, that's a tax policy issue, I wish I could say. I've heard some folks, Senator Joe Bowen said something about loopholes, closing some loopholes. When I get a tax advantage, it's an intelligent tax incentive, and when somebody else, it's a loophole. So I don't know where someone's ox is going to be gored, but you know we need to do tax reform anyway. Come on. How much longer do we have to wait to have a tax system that's 21st century? Now, does that mean there's going to be billions of dollars rolling in? No, that's not the point of tax reform. I wish I had an answer of where the money comes from, but again, that's up to the legislators to figure something out.
Yeah.
To add to that, we have actually looked at the impact of the influx of various amounts of money into the KERS non-hazardous plan. $1 billion, $2 billion, $3.5, $5 billion. If we put $5 billion in a single year into the KERS non-hazardous plan, it would raise its funding status to 58%. So, and it's got an $11.6 billion unfunded liability. So it's going to take a lot of money to bring that plan to 100% funded, and it's going to take a lot of years in order to do that. I'm a short timer, so I can say this. I spent 23 years working with local government, and I actually retired in 2005 and began working on tax policy issues until I joined the retirement system in mid-2006. And I really believe until we reform our tax system and expand the base that we are never going to have enough money in Kentucky to fulfill our obligations to both the retirement system, the educational system, infrastructure needs, Medicaid. We simply don't have the money, and that's a realistic view of our budget. I think the General Assembly and the governor have tried to find additional funds, but it's very, very difficult in this economy. And as I said, it's extremely critical that they continue to pay the actuarially required contribution, and that's going to increase. In the next biennium, I expect that to be somewhere around $100 to $120 million more than they're paying this year just to pay the ARC.
From our standpoint, most of you know that we looked at a pension obligation bond in order to give the state a bridge into this funding issue that we have. Right now, we're going to be asking the next governor in the first year of the biennium for $510 million out of the budget and $490 million in the second year of the biennium. $1 billion out of this next biennium for the state to catch up these contributions to teachers. That's when we said, what can be done from a financing standpoint? What can be done in order to help the state do this? We were given the task of how can you do this and have the least impact on taxpayers. Right now, interest rates are as low as they've ever been in the history of lending. And that's for a purpose. It's because the housing bubble, when it burst, it reduced the economy so badly that it undermined our financial institutions in this country. We have the ability to take this opportunity when rates are low to borrow these funds that we need to cover this cash flow that we've got going out the door, these obligations to teachers. We have that opportunity today. This bond that we talked about doing is a bridge loan, if you will. It gives us the opportunity to give the state 8 years to step into this ARC that we need, this additional contribution that we need. And that would give us, the state, the rate of $44 million a year, increasing the contribution to this pension plan by $44 million a year, up to a level 8 years from now of $400 million as opposed to $500 million today. That's what $3.3 billion into our plan does. Now, where does the source of this bond money come from? It doesn't come from taxpayers. It comes from the general fund budget and dollars already appropriated to teachers' retirement system. Taxpayer dollars that are already coming into the general fund. It's not new tax revenue that we need. We just reappropriate the tax dollars that we have coming in today to pay, that's been used to pay prior benefits, tax dollars that are being used to pay bonds in this bridge loan that was made back whenever shared responsibility legislation was passed in 2010. So the dollars are already there to pay the principal interest on this $3.3 billion loan. There's no additional dollars out of the general fund budget to do that. But it gives the state the chance to step in over an 8-year period to meeting this ARC, and the ARC will be at a lower level in 8 years because we have $3.3 billion and we're not cashing in investments over that period of time to meet benefits. Now, tax revenues, yes. We could always do with additional tax revenues. I was a CPA for 20 years. When you say tax revenues, that kind of makes me curl a little bit. So I think we have to be smart about what we do in financing these pension plans, and I think that this plan that we put before the General Assembly and passed the House the last time, I think that plan is smart for Kentucky's taxpayers.
Gary, let me follow up on one comment you made earlier about how we got here. I didn't look at the S&P. I did look at the Dow. You mentioned 401k plans and the like. On July 24th, 2008, which was a couple months before the Lehman Brothers calamity, the Dow was the average was 11,349. Friday, even with the downtick, it was 17,568, and those that have investments in the market know what that's meant. Why has that upsurge not cured the problem that was caused by the downturn that you mentioned earlier?
Great question. The issue is that we've never had 100% of the assets. The liabilities grow at 7.5%. The way we determine the liabilities is we take the total payout that we expect to all active and retired teachers. That number is $165 billion over their lifetimes, both active, brand new teachers in the classroom all the way through our retiree that's 108 that we send a check to. The liability is determined on them, and it's $165 billion. It's discounted back at 7.5%. So we know our liabilities are going to grow at 7.5%. Assets have to be equal to those liabilities and have to grow at 7.5% in order for that to work. So we were below 100% funded when the market crashed. And then when the market turned down, course, we lost even more assets. So the assets for teachers have never been 100% of the liabilities. And that's the reason is that we didn't have the assets to catch up.
The
Bill,
answer
you
is
wanna
much the
wait?
same for KRS. In '08, we lost 4% return, a negative 4%, a negative 17% in 2009. We lost over $2 billion in the '08-09 recession. And you all know if you have $1,000 invested and you lose down to 500, it takes double the return to get back to where you were. And in addition, for those years until 2015, the legislature was paying 47% of the ARC, 49%, 51% of the ARC, not even anywhere near the full actuarially required contribution that would have allowed us to earn, say, in four of the last 5 years, significant double-digit returns. So it takes a long time and large returns to get back to where you were.
Let me, two or three, maybe all three of you have mentioned underfunding by the employer, which means General Assembly approved budgets. The Pew Charitable Trust a couple years ago did their own study of how we got here. And what they found was that shortfalls in employer contributions only accounted for 17.4% of the current problem. They found that COLAs cost of living adjustments accounted for 18.2%. The underperforming investments accounted for 18.7%. We've just been talking about that. Changing assumptions, and I think everybody in this room that's dealt with pension plans knows what that's about. There was a period of time when all the actuaries assumed a certain level of return. Then with what happened in the recession, what they assumed the returns on investments would be dropped. Therefore, they assume less earnings out in the future. Assumptions not met, that's related to the first one. Actually, an interesting benefit changes only accounted for 1.6%. So at least over that period of time, when we went from an acceptable level of funding, in some cases close to 100% down to where we are now, it wasn't an explosion in the so-called unfunded mandates, benefit changes from the legislature. Do you all agree with that, or is this a case where we've just got competing realities between you all and the Pew Charitable Trust?
Well, I would dispute the Pew's figures. First of all, as I said, we have a very complex system. What happens frequently on a national basis is they'll take the lump sum of all of our plans and come up with conclusions that don't fit each of the plans. I've asked our actuaries over the last several years, and the latest one that they did was at the end of 2014, to attribute the increase in our unfunded liability to various causes. And I had a chart that I didn't include in this that actually shows that over the last 7 years. 25% of the increase is attributable to investment losses in '08 and '09, essentially, and in 2012 we were flat. About 15.5% was attributable to unfunded cost of living adjustments. Every 1.5% cost of living adjustment adds about $2.25 million to our unfunded liability. So a 1.5% COLA over 5 years adds $1 billion to the unfunded liability. The third cause for the KERS and state police plans was the underfunding by the employer. That was 30% in those two plans. Now you can compare CERS, which is 60+% funded, to the 21% in KERS, and the significant difference is the employer funding, because local government employers have always had to pay 100% of the ARC. The demographics are not that different. And then the remainder of the cause was due to compliance with new health insurance accounting and reporting requirements that the Governmental Accounting Standards Board enacted in 2006, which required us to up the funding for insurance, or actually resulted in upping the funding. Demographic changes, assumption changes, and things of that nature. So I think the Pew's figures are off.
I think that goes double for KTRS in that those figures, for most pension plans, they're subject to Social Security. So for teachers, it's completely different set of data than what Pew had there when they did their averages.
Let's talk about the benefit side. We've talked about the cost and the contribution side. Let's talk about the benefit side. defined benefit plans are essentially a thing of the past in the private sector. We've all gone to defined contribution plans, 401k, and the like. Why does that not make sense as the ultimate answer? Obviously, you've got this big nut you've got to crack out there. Why does that not make sense for the public sector employees, just like it is a fact of life now for virtually all private sector employees?
Well, I think for teachers, it particularly would be hard to have a 401k plan and no Social Security. The cost of making teachers subject to Social Security in the state is about $690 million a year for teachers to be subject to Social Security today and still have the same take-home pay that they have today. If we don't, we'd have to cut teachers' pay for them to become subject to Social Security. So $690 million there to be subject to Social Security, and the benefits less. Social Security is a very inefficient system. Right now,
I think we'd all agree with that.
Yes, Social Security is a very inefficient system. I was, being an accountant over the years, I've dealt with that issue many times, but we invest cheaper than 401k plans. We buy wholesale, 401k plans buy retail, and our administrative costs are lower, and we invest better than individuals do. Typically, a professionally managed portfolio will outperform an individual portfolio by 1%. And typically, the cost of a 401k plan are 1% higher than the cost that we have in our plan. That 2% compounded over many years is the difference between, is about a 60% difference in the dollars you have to spend upon retirement. So we think we have a very, very efficient system for teachers and an appropriate system in Kentucky for teachers, since teachers don't have Social Security.
Bill?
I'd echo what Gary has said about the cost of DC versus DB plans. But the bigger problem we have is the unfunded actuarial liability of $17 billion. If we were 100% funded in all of our plans, the switch to a DC plan would be relatively simple without major issues. But we've had our actuaries look at this. When you close a defined benefit plan to new members and put all new members in a DC plan, the accounting, reporting, and contribution cost calculations under GASB differ greatly. Our actuaries have determined that it would cost hundreds of millions of dollars more to pay the cost of the DB plan and a DC plan match over the course of 12 to 15 to 18 years. So the state can ill afford right now to pay the ARC, or is having a difficult time. To add hundreds of millions of dollars to that by closing a DB plan is simply unworkable. So that's not an option as long as we have the unfunded actuarial liability, unless you really want to come up with some additional dollars.
Jim, you mentioned broken promises. Why can the part of the answer not be simply changing the benefit structure, including the benefit structure for those already retired? One phrase that I've not heard yet in this discussion this morning is something called inviolable contract. That might be useful for somebody to describe for the audience.
The term inviolable contract simply describes the relationship that a stakeholder has with state government in terms of post-employment benefits. And in 1995, the Kentucky Supreme Court looked at the contract as it relates to retiree benefits, and it concluded that we have strong guarantees going forward with pension benefits, which reflected the intent of the legislature in putting forth the state statute that says the benefits shall not be altered. At the specific time of that ruling, it had to do with the ARC paying that contribution, but at the time the funding was above 100% and there was no threat of losing benefits. But the concept of the contract is, like most states, there's a contract between the employees and their employers to maintain the benefits that they were promised when they came to service. If that is, someone violates that contract, then the next question is, what other contracts can the state violate with any other interest group just because of its incompetence in being able to fund the system. I mean, what are the reasons will you find for violating the contract? Certainly can't go to court and say there's been this emergency here in this pension fund that no one could have foreseen that makes it necessary to cut benefits. This is not an emergency. An emergency, by definition, happens over a short length of time. This was just incompetent policy over a decade.
Tell us what you really think.
What do I have to lose?
No, nothing. Bill tells me it's about time for us to wrap up. I want to thank our panelists for shedding a lot of light on this very difficult issue.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good job, Bill.
Bill, thanks. This is one of those sessions that all of you probably can agree that could have gone for hours. It's a complicated discussion. These gentlemen have shed some light and some clarity on it. It'll be something that each and every one of us should be aware of and try to, as best we can, offer some suggestions and solutions as the General Assembly gets closer to their 2016 session. And the Commission is meeting too, and those are always open to the public. If you don't watch them on KET, you can attend those in person, and they'll be held throughout now until December when the report is due. We're going to take a break now, a 20-minute dessert break, brought to you and sponsored by Kentucky Power. So enjoy yourselves and try to be back in this room at about 2:55, if you will. 2:55. Thanks very much.